That morning, no one expected a single act of defiance to change military history. What began as routine training became a moment every soldier on base would remember, and one that would test the difference between following orders and doing what's right. The rain fell steadily over Credenhill, turning the parade square into a slick mirror of grey sky. It was the sort of Hereford morning that seeped into your bones, the kind where the cold air carried the faint tang of wet earth and polished leather. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove stood at the edge of the formation, her boots planted firmly on the damp gravel, shoulders squared under the weight of her waterproof smock. She was 28, with close-cropped dark hair that framed a face etched by quiet endurance, eyes steady, jaw set, betraying nothing of the hours she'd already logged in the pre-dawn gym. The squadron had mustered for morning parade, a ritual as unyielding as the Welsh borders themselves. Sergeant Major Wilkins barked the orders from the front, his voice cutting through the drizzle like a bayonet. Fall in. By the right, quick march. Boots struck the ground in unison, a rhythmic thud that echoed off the low brick barracks. Privates and corporals shuffled into line, their breath visible in the chill, rifles slung across their chests. This was the 22nd Regiment, the Para's shadow in the Special Air Service selection pipeline, men and women forged in the quiet grind of selection, where weakness was culled without fanfare. Eleanor took her place among the ranks, third file from the rear. She moved with the precision of someone who'd long since internalized the drill, her steps measured, gaze fixed ahead. No one spared her a glance beyond the obligatory nod. She was the steady hand in the machine, the one who volunteered for the night watches without complaint. But whispers followed her like the mist rolling in from the River Wye. "Hargrove," they'd mutter in the mess hall, "thinks she's too good for the banter." It wasn't overt. British Army culture didn't tolerate outright confrontation, but the sidelong looks, the deliberate exclusion from after-hours pints at the NAFI spoke volumes. Wilkins paced the square as the company halted, his boots leaving shallow prints in the mud. He was a veteran of tours in Helmand and the Balkans, his frame broad under the sergeant's stripes, face weathered like old oak. "Inspection," he called, and the ranks stiffened. He started at the front, eyes scanning uniforms for the slightest flaw. A loose thread, a smudge on a beret. Elena felt the routine settle over her like a familiar weight. She'd passed 100 such inspections, her kit always immaculate, her responses clipped and correct. But today, something shifted. As Wilkins reached the middle files, Corporal Rees, a stocky lad from Manchester with a chip on his shoulder, fumbled his rifle sling. It wasn't much, a momentary snag, but in the rigid hierarchy of the square, it drew eyes. Rees shot a glance back at Eleanor, his lips curling in a half-sneer. She'd corrected him once, weeks ago, during a live-fire exercise. "Sling tighter, Corp. It'll save your neck out there." He'd taken it as a slight, and now, in the downpour, he saw his chance. "Private Hargrove," Wilkins snapped, his gaze locking on her. It was a misstep. Elena was a lance corporal, 2 stripes up, but in the heat of the moment, ranks blurred under scrutiny. She stepped forward without hesitation, saluting crisply. "Sir," Wilkins thrust out a hand, "your file, now." Elena blinked once, but complied, reaching into her smock pocket for the slim folder that held her service record. It was standard procedure for spot checks. Though rarely invoked on the square, she handed it over, fingers brushing the damp cover. He flipped it open under the shelter of his cap, scanning the pages with the efficiency of a man who'd seen it all. Routine entries, basic training at Purebright, jumps at Bryce Norton, a commendation for logistics in Estonia. Then, his brow furrowed. A page near the back edges frayed from handling bore a red stamp. Classified. He paused, but only for a beat, before slamming the file shut. The rain had picked up, pooling around their feet, and in a gesture born of frustration, or perhaps the morning's mounting irritation, he tossed it aside. The folder landed in a puddle with a soft splat, mud seeping into the corners, the classified page face down in the filth. A ripple went through the ranks, stifled coughs shifted weight. Rees smirked openly now, and even some of the privates exchanged glances. Elena didn't flinch. She stood there, posture unbroken, eyes on the horizon where the barracks faded into the fog. Inside, a flicker of something, Resignation, perhaps, or the steel of long practice, but her face remained a mask of disciplined calm. No protest, no reach to retrieve it. Just silence, as the rain drummed on. Wilkins cleared his throat, moving on without a word, as if the incident hadn't occurred. "Carry on." The company resumed its march, boots splashing through the growing puddles, the echo of discipline reasserting itself. Eleanor fell back into line, her mind already cataloguing the morning's tasks, range prep, equipment checks. The file lay forgotten in the mud, its secrets submerged, much like the woman who'd carried it. By midday, the rain had eased to a fine mist, and the squadron dispersed to the armory. Elena retrieved her folder later, alone, wiping the mud from the cover with a rag. The classified page was intact, its ink unyielding, but she folded it away without a second glance. In the regiment's world, some truths stayed buried, shared only with those who needed to know. She slung her pack and headed to the cookhouse, the weight of the morning settling like dew on her shoulders. That evening, as the sun dipped low over the Brecon beacons, a convoy rolled in from Hereford. Blacked-out Land Rovers, no markings, the subtle insignia of selection cadre. High-ranking officers, whispers said, here to observe the next phase of training. Eleanor was in the gym when they arrived, methodically pressing weights, her form flawless in the dim light. One of the visitors, a major with the quiet bearing of long service, paused at the window, his gaze lingering on her reflection. But she didn't notice, lost in the rhythm of her reps, the world outside as distant as the missions she'd left behind. The base hummed with its usual efficiency. Sergeants coordinating rotas in the ops room, the clink of mess tins in the hall, the distant call of a bugle practicing for evening stand easy. Yet beneath it all, a tension coiled, unspoken, like the fog clinging to the hills. Eleanor Hargrove moved through it all, a shadow in the ranks, her competence a quiet anchor. No one knew then how the muddied file would unravel threads long woven tight, or how a single page would command respect from those who guarded the regiment's secrets. In the quiet hours before lights out, she sat on her bunk, polishing her boots by the light of a single bulb. The rain pattered against the window, a steady reminder of the world beyond the wire. Discipline held her steady as it always had, through the mocks, the exclusions, the weight of what she'd seen and done. Tomorrow would bring more drills, more orders, but in the regiment, tomorrow always carried the promise of revelation, however subtle, however earned. The next morning dawned with the same relentless drizzle, the kind that turned Credon Hill's gravel paths into a mosaic of shallow pools. Lance Corporal Eleanor Hargrove rose before reveille, her movements precise in the dim light of the barracks. She dressed methodically, olive-drab trousers tucked into polished boots, shirt pressed to a knife-edge crease, beret aligned with the precision of a theodolite. At 28, she carried the quiet authority of someone who'd earned her stripes through deeds unspoken. Her frame lean from years of endurance marches across the Brecon beacons. No fanfare marked her routine. She was simply there, a fixture in the squadron's unyielding rhythm. Reveille sounded at 0545, the shrill pipe cutting through the fog like a sergeant's command. The company stirred, bunks creaking as privates fumbled for their kit. Eleanor was already at the ablutions block, splashing cold water on her face, the metallic tang of the taps mingling with the earthy scent of damp stone. By the time the formation assembled on the drill square, she was in position, third file, her posture ramrod straight against the chill wind sweeping down from the hills. Sergeant Major Wilkins took the salute, his voice a gravelly anchor. "Squadron, attention!" The ranks snapped to, boots grinding into the wet gravel, a collective exhale visible in the grey light. This was the heart of British Army life at Credon Hill, the SAS selection feeder base where the 22nd Regiment honed its edge. Roll call followed, Wilkins' ledger open under the brim of his cap. "Private Ellis." "Here, sir." The responses came crisp, no embellishment, each name a thread in the tapestry of discipline. Elena's turn arrived midway. "Lance Corporal Hargrove." "Here, sir." Her voice was even, uninflected, eyes fixed on the distant tree line where the wise mist clung low. No one lingered on her name. She blended into the order, just another set of stripes in the hierarchy that stretched from wide-eyed privates to the grizzled majors overseeing from the officers' mess. The morning unfolded in its prescribed cadence. After parade, the squadron marched to the armory for equipment checks, the clip of heels on concrete echoing off the low-slung brick buildings. Eleanor led her section of corporals and privates, her instructions delivered in clipped tones, rifles cleaned to spec, no residue, sling adjustments by 0800. She demonstrated once, her hands steady as she threaded the webbing, the faint click of buckles the only sound. Corporal Reese, still nursing his grudge from the previous day's fumble, rolled his eyes but complied, muttering under his breath to a nearby private. "Always the stickler, eh?" The words didn't reach her. Elena's focus was absolute, her competence a silent rebuttal to the undercurrents of doubt that swirled around her. By 0900, they were on the training yard, the air heavy with the smell of wet grass and gun oil. The routine was relentless, weapon handling drills, where privates stripped and reassembled SA-80s under the watchful eyes of lance corporals like Elena. She moved among them, correcting a misaligned bolt carrier here, a loose foresight there, her touch light but firm. "Steady pressure," she said to one young recruit, whose hands trembled in the cold. He nodded, cheeks flushing, but there was no warmth in the exchange, just the transaction of knowledge, passed down the ranks without sentiment. In the distance, the Brecon beacons loomed under a leaden sky, their slopes a perpetual reminder of the tabbing marches that weeded out the unfit. Lunch in the mess hall brought a brief respite, the hall a cavern of formica tables and the steam of institutional cooking. Elena queued with her tray, beans on toast, a mug of builder's tea strong enough to stand a spoon in, navigating the line with the economy of long habit. The space buzzed with subdued conversation, sergeants dissecting the morning's turnout, privates trading glances over their plates. She took her seat at a corner table, alone, fork moving methodically. Reese and his mates claimed the center benches, their laughter a low rumble. "Heard Hargrove's file got a mud bath yesterday," one quipped, loud enough to carry. "Probably blank anyway, nothing but filing duties." Snickers followed, the mockery veiled in the dry humor of the ranks. Never direct enough to warrant a formal complaint. Eleanor's gaze stayed on her plate, her posture unchanging, the subtle tightening of her jaw the only sign she'd registered it. She ate in silence, the clatter of cutlery and scrape of chairs filling the void. Afternoon brought the real grind, a section assault course under Major Hargreaves's oversight. He was a tall figure, late 40s. With the measured gait of a man who'd commanded in shadowed corners of the world, Falklands veteran, Whispers said, now liaison to the SAS cadre. "On my mark," he called from the sidelines, stopwatch in hand. The teams rotated through the obstacles, low crawls under razor wire, scaling walls slick with rain, the burn of lactic acid in the legs. Elena's section hit the course first, her voice a steady metronome. "Move, move, cover your arcs." She led from the front, vaulting a log barrier with fluid economy, her breath controlled even as mud spattered her fatigues. The privates followed, grunting through the mire, but it was her quiet efficiency that drew Hargreaves's eye, a fleeting glance noted but unremarked. As the sun began its weak descent, casting long shadows over the yard, the squadron stood down for evening admin. Eleanor reported to the quartermaster's store, logging returns with the precision of a quartermaster sergeant herself. The air in the stores carried the musty scent of oiled canvas and cordite, shelves lined with burgans and ponchos. Private Ellis, assigned to assist, fumbled a crate of ammunition links, earning a sharp word from the QM. Elena stepped in without fuss, steadying the load and restacking it. "Like this," she murmured, her hands guiding his. He mumbled thanks, but the moment passed unmarked, her aid absorbed into the routine. Back in the barracks as dusk fell, the base settled into its evening hush. Lights flickered on in the Nafi bar, where off-duty ranks gathered for pints and pool, the murmur of voices drifting on the damp air. Eleanor opted for the gym instead, the clang of weights her chosen solitude. She pressed through sets of cleans and jerks, the barbell's chill bite against her palms grounding her. From the window, she could see the visitors' Land Rovers parked discreetly by the officers' block, their occupants, SAS evaluators by the cut of their kit, conferring in low tones. One, a captain with a faint scar along his jaw, paused to watch the yard, but his attention shifted inward, lost in thought. In the regiment's world, order was the unspoken creed, a hierarchy etched into every bootprint on the square. Lance corporals like Elena bridged the gap between raw privates and authoritative sergeants, their role one of quiet enforcement. Yet for all her competence, the underestimation lingered. A woman in a man's grind, her silences mistaken for weakness. As she wiped down the bench and headed to her bunk, the rain resumed its patter against the panes, a soft percussion to the day's close. Discipline bound them all, from the majors in their briefs to the privates scrubbing floors. But beneath it, the subtle fractures waited, the mocks that chipped at resolve, the exclusions that tested loyalty. Eleanor lay back, staring at the ceiling beams, her mind tracing the lines of tomorrow's roster. In the quiet professionalism of Credenhill, such routines were the forge. What emerged from them, only time and trial would reveal. The third day at Credenhill broke under a sky the colour of polished slate, the rain holding off just long enough to let the parade square dry to a treacherous sheen. Lance Corporal Eleanor Hargrove was up at first light, her bunk made with hospital corners before the rest of the barracks stirred. She moved through her ablutions with the economy of habit, the cold splash of water from the basin sharpening her focus against the lingering chill. At 28, she'd learned to compartmentalize the small slights, the sidelong glances, the muttered asides, like loading rounds into a magazine. One after another, without letting them jam the mechanism. By 0600, the squadron was forming up again, the gravel crunching under boots as they fell into line. Sergeant Major Wilkins's voice carried across the square, steady as the tick of a chronometer. "Parade, attention!" The ranks responded as one, a ripple of disciplined movement that cut through the morning mist rolling in from the Wye Valley. Eleanor took her place, third file, her gaze leveled on the flagpole where the Union Jack hung limp in the still air. The routine was etched into her. Roll call inspection, then the march to the training grounds. No deviations, no allowances for the undercurrents that simmered beneath. Wilkins paced the front, his ledger tucked under one arm, eyes scanning for lapses. "Company, stand at ease." A collective shift of weight, the faint creak of webbing. He began the inspection proper, starting with the front ranks, his gloved hand occasionally brushing a collar or tugging at a cuff. Eleanor waited, her breathing even, the faint scent of wet concrete rising from the ground. When he reached her file, his step didn't falter, but Corporal Reese, 2 places ahead, tensed visibly. The man had been stewing since the armory the day before, his fumble with the ammo crate still fresh. Eleanor's quiet intervention a thorn he couldn't extract. "Lance Corporal Hargrove," as Wilkins intoned, stopping before her. She snapped to attention, saluting with precision. "Sir." He nodded curtly, extending a hand for her sidearm holster, a standard check, though the air felt thicker today, charged like the moments before a squall. Elena unclipped the holster smoothly, passing it over. Wilkins drew the pistol, inspecting the slide and chamber with practiced efficiency, the metallic click echoing softly. Satisfied, he handed it back, but as he turned to move on, Reese shifted, just enough to accidentally jostle Elena's elbow in the tight formation. It was subtle, the kind of contact that could pass for a misstep in the ranks, but deliberate enough to unbalance her. Her boot caught the edge of a loose stone, and she stumbled forward half a pace, the holster slipping from her grasp. It hit the gravel with a dull thud, dust puffing up around it. A murmur rippled through the nearby files, stifled but present, like the hush before a reprimand. Reese's face remained neutral, but his eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of payback, the private beside him biting back a smirk. Wilkins wheeled back, his brow creasing. "Hargrove, what in blazes was that?" The words weren't shouted. British sergeants didn't need volume to command respect, but they sliced through the square like a bayonet. Eleanor straightened instantly, retrieving the holster without a word, her fingers steady as she rebuckled it. Mud from the previous day's puddle still clung to the edges. A faint smear she ignored. "Apologies, sir, my footing slipped." Her voice was level, devoid of excuse or plea, eyes meeting his without evasion. The sergeant major's gaze hardened, lingering on her for a beat longer than protocol demanded. Around them, the ranks held formation, but the tension coiled tighter. Privates shifting infinitesimally, corporals like Reese exchanging glances that spoke of shared grievance. Wilkins thrust out his hand again, this time for her beret. "Remove it. Head inspection." Eleanor complied, pulling the wool cap free, her close-cropped hair revealing nothing but the pale line of her scalp. He scanned her crown, then dropped the beret at her feet, deliberately, or so it seemed in the charged moment, letting it land in a shallow divot of damp earth. "Pick it up," he ordered, his tone clipped, the implication clear. A lapse in discipline demanded correction, public and immediate. Eleanor bent at the waist, retrieving it with measured grace, the mud transferring to her fingertips. She brushed it off against her trouser leg, replaced it squarely on her head, and resumed attention. No protest crossed her lips, no flicker of indignation in her posture. Inside, the familiar weight settled, the isolation of silence, the quiet dignity of endurance, but her face betrayed nothing, a mask forged in the unyielding fires of selection. Wilkins moved on without further comment, the inspection resuming its rhythm, but the damage lingered in the air like cordite after a blank round. As the company marched off to the range, Reese fell into step beside a mate, his voice low. "Slippery as an eel, that one. No wonder her file's all mud and mystery." The words carried just far enough, a public barb wrapped in the dry wit of the mess. Elena heard, of course, ears trained to pick out threats in the din, but she kept her eyes front, steps matching the cadence, the echo of boots on gravel drowning out the rest. The range session dragged into the afternoon, the crack of SA-80s punctuating the chill. Elena's section rotated through firing points, her role to oversee safety and scores. She moved between the lanes, adjusting stances with minimal words. Sight picture aligned, squeeze, don't jerk. One private, a lanky lad from the Midlands, hesitated on his trigger pull, earning a nudge from Reese. "Follow Hargrove's lead then. She's the expert on dropping kit." The group chuckled, subdued but pointed, the humiliation staged as camaraderie. Elena logged the scores in her notepad, her pen steady, ignoring the jab as she would incoming fire. Acknowledge, adapt, proceed. By mess time, the sky had darkened again, fat drops beginning to spatter the cookhouse windows. Elena queued for her tray. Stew and mash today, the steam carrying the bland comfort of army rations. The hall was a hum of low voices, benches scraping as sections claimed tables. She balanced her tray, navigating the crowded aisle, when Reese bumped her from behind, another accident, his shoulder clipping her arm. The tray tilted, a spoonful of stew slopping onto the floor, the mug of tea wobbling perilously. Laughter erupted from his table, drawing eyes from across the room. "Steady on, Lance Corp, don't want to make a splash." She righted it without spilling more, setting the tray down at her usual corner spot. The mess sergeant glanced over but said nothing. Such incidents were the warp and weft of rank life, rarely escalated unless they disrupted order. Eleanor sat, fork in hand, eating methodically as the mockery washed over her like the rain outside. No retort, no raised voice, just the subtle clench of her jaw, the reserved pull of her shoulders inward. In the hierarchy of Credenhill, silence was her armor, the quiet professionalism that had carried her through shadowed ops and endless tabs. As the evening wore on, the visitors from Hereford lingered in the officers' block, their presence a subtle undercurrent. Eleanor finished her meal and headed to the stores for inventory, the day's violations catalogued but unvoiced. The base settled into its routines, the clip of patrols on the perimeter, the distant hum of generators, but beneath it all, the test of resolve sharpened. In the regiment's forge, injustice was the hammer. How one bore it, the measure of the steel. Comment where you're watching from. I want to know how far stories of courage and integrity can reach. The fourth day at Credenhill unfolded under a pall of low cloud, the air thick with the scent of impending rain, and the faint, acrid bite of cordite from the morning's range. Lance Corporal Eleanor Hargrove rose with the first hints of dawn, her body clock attuned to the base's unyielding pulse. She folded her blanket with crisp precision, the coarse wool whispering against the bunk frame, then stepped into the corridor where the chill seeped through the flagstones. At 28, she'd mastered the art of anticipation, Kit laid out the night before, boots gleaming under a thin layer of dubbin. No wasted motion, no allowance for the bruises of yesterday's slights. Discipline was her compass, pointing true through the fog of resentment. Reveille pierced the barracks at 0545, the pipe's shrill note rallying the squadron from their bunks. Eleanor was already at the wash basins, the cold water from the taps shocking her skin awake, droplets tracing paths down her neck as she toweled off. By formation time, she stood in her place on the drill square third file, the gravel still damp from the night's mist. Sergeant Major Wilkins's commands rang out, measured and authoritative. "Squadron by the left, quick march." The ranks moved as one, boots thudding in syncopated rhythm, the echo bouncing off the brick facades of the officers' quarters. Eleanor's steps were faultless, her gaze fixed ahead, betraying none of the internal ledger where she tallied the previous day's barbs. The jostle in the mess, the dropped beret, the laughter that lingered like smoke. The morning's agenda shifted subtly today. Word had filtered through the ranks overnight about the visitors from Hereford. Not the usual cadre, but a select group, SAS evaluators, by the whispers in the NAFI, here to assess the pipeline's mettle ahead of the next selection phase. Their Land Rovers sat discreetly by the visitors' block, engines cooling under camouflage netting, the drivers vanishing into the admin offices without fanfare. Eleanor noted it peripherally as the company halted for inspection, her posture unchanging amid the collective stiffen. Wilkins paced the front, his eyes sharper than usual, perhaps sensing the added scrutiny. "Attention!" The command snapped the air taut, and the ranks locked into place. Rifles at the slope, breaths held against the chill. Inspection proceeded with its ritual gravity, Wilkins' gloved fingers probing seams and buckles. When he reached Eleanor's file, the air seemed to thicken, but he passed without incident. No demands for files or sidearms, just a curt nod. Relief was fleeting. Corporal Rees, still smarting from his own oversights, caught her eye with a mocking tilt of his head as they stood at ease. "Smooth sailing today, Hargrove," he murmured to no one in particular, the words drifting like chaff on the wind. She didn't respond, her silence a deliberate barrier, eyes on the horizon where the Brecon beacons hulked under the grey. Post-parade, the squadron dispersed to the training yard for advanced patrolling drills, the ground a slick mosaic of mud and grass. Major Hargreaves oversaw from the sidelines, his presence amplified by the two visitors flanking him, a captain and a major, both in unmarked fatigues that hung with the understated weight of long service. The captain, mid-40s with a jaw scarred faintly from some unshared encounter, stood with arms crossed, his gaze methodical, scanning the sections as they formed up. Elena's group was assigned a flanking maneuver, her role to coordinate the rear guard. "Positions," she said quietly to her privates, her voice carrying just far enough, hands gesturing arcs of fire with economical precision. They moved out, low and silent across the undulating terrain, the wet earth sucking at their boots. It was during the halt and crawl phase that the observers drew closer. The captain detached from Hargreaves, circling the yard with the unhurried stride of a man who'd stalked worse shadows. Elena was on point for her section, directing a low crawl under simulated wire, imaginary in this exercise, but the mud was real enough, cold and clinging, as it smeared her elbows and knees. She demonstrated first, dropping prone and propelling forward with controlled power, her body slicing through the mire like a blade. One private faltered, snagging on a root. Elena paused, extending a hand to steady him without breaking cover. "Breathe through it. Keep low." Her tone was instructional, devoid of condescension, the movement fluid, almost instinctive. The captain halted some 20 meters away, his boots planted in the grass, eyes narrowing on the scene. He didn't speak, didn't signal. He simply watched, his stillness a contrast to the scramble around him. Eleanor felt the weight of observation, not intrusive but appraising, like the pressure of a spotter's scope from afar. As she rose to reset the drill, shrugging off the mud from her sleeves, her cuff rode up briefly, exposing the edge of a tattoo on her inner wrist. A simple winged dagger, inked in faded black, the SAS insignia half concealed by the fold of fabric. She tugged the sleeve down without thought, resuming her commands, but the captain's posture shifted imperceptibly. A subtle straightening of the shoulders, the faintest tilt of his head. The drill continued into midday, the squadron rotating through fire-team assaults, the crack of blanks punctuating the air. Elena's competence shone in the details, adjusting a private's firing stance with a minimal touch to the elbow, calling corrections on overexposure without raising her voice. Reese's section floundered on a bounding overwatch, earning a clipped rebuke from Hargreaves, but Elena's held formation, her quiet authority binding them. The major visitor, taller, with the bearing of command, joined the captain now, their conference a low murmur, eyes flicking toward her intermittently. No words carried. SAS men didn't broadcast, their assessments woven into glances and pauses. Lunch in the mess hall offered no respite from the undercurrents. Elena queued amid the steam of shepherd's pie and overboiled veg, her tray balanced with care. The hall buzzed subdued, ranks dissecting the morning's drills over mugs of tea. She claimed her corner table, fork moving steadily, when Reese's voice cut through from the center benches. Hargrove's crawling like she's got 9 lives. Must be all that practice dropping things. Laughter rippled, pointed but deniable, drawing a few nods from privates. Elena's jaw tightened fractionally, her eyes on her plate, the salt of the pie grounding her against the sting. Across the room, the visitors entered with Hargreaves, taking an officer's table. The captain's gaze swept the hall once, lingering on her for a beat, before settling on his meal. No intervention, no acknowledgement, just observation, deep and unyielding. Afternoon brought classroom briefings in the ops room, a low-ceilinged space redolent of chalk dust and stale coffee. The squadron filed in, Eleanor at the rear of her section, notepad in hand. The topic was urban reconnaissance, slides projected on a battered screen, maps of shadowed alleys in Belfast derivatives, emphasis on silent movement and threat ID. She contributed sparingly when called, a precise question on sightlines answered with a nod from the instructor. The captain sat at the back, arms folded, his presence a quiet pressure. As the session broke for notes, Eleanor reviewed her page, her pen tracing a diagram with surgical accuracy. A glimpse of her wrist again, the tattoo peeking as she wrote, and the captain's eyes fixed there, recognition flickering in the depths unspoken. As the day waned, the rain finally broke, a steady patter drumming on the tin roof of the armory where Eleanor logged returns. The visitors conferred outside with Wilkins, their voices inaudible over the downpour. But the major's nod toward the stores was unmistakable. Elena worked on, oblivious or choosing to be, the clink of metal and scent of oil her sanctuary. In the regiment's veiled world, hints surfaced like buoys in fog. A mark from a mission long classified, discipline honed in places unnamed. The observers saw what the ranks overlooked, the quiet thread connecting her to the regiment, a past veiled but not erased. Evening stand easy came with the base settling into hush, lights winking on across the wire. Elena headed to the gym, the rhythmic thud of her footfalls on the treadmill echoing her resolve. From the window, she caught sight of the captain again, paused in conversation with Hargreaves, his gaze drifting toward the lit room. Stillness defined him, no exclamation, no approach, just the subtle respect of one who recognized kin, the air between them charged with the weight of shared secrets. In Credenhill's ordered expanse, observation was the first step toward revelation, subtle as the shift in wind before the storm. The 5th day at Credenhill carried the weight of accumulated damp, the air heavy with the residue of overnight rain that left the parade square glistening under a reluctant sun. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove moved through her morning routine with the same unyielding precision, her boots leaving faint impressions on the dew-slicked paths as she made her way to the armory. The base stirred around her, the low hum of generators, the distant clip of a sentry's patrol, the faint aroma of frying bacon drifting from the cookhouse. At 28, she'd long since learned to navigate the subtle hierarchies that defined life here, the way a sergeant's glance could elevate or diminish, the unspoken codes that bound the ranks in quiet tension. Réveillé came sharp at 5:45, pulling the squadron from their bunks into the grey light. Eleanor fell into formation on the drill square, third file as always, her posture a model of restraint amid the collective shuffle. Sergeant Major Wilkins took the salute, his voice carrying the clipped authority of long service. "Squadron, attention!" Boots ground into the gravel, rifles snapping to the slope, the formation locking into its rigid geometry. The visitors from Hereford were present now, integrated into the oversight without fanfare. The captain and major standing at the periphery with Major Hargreaves, their unmarked fatigues blending into the backdrop of brick and wire. No introductions, no briefings. Their presence was felt in the heightened scrutiny, the way Wilkins' pace quickened ever so slightly during roll call. Lance Corporal Hargrove. Wilkins intoned when her name came, his tone neutral but edged with the memory of prior lapses. She responded crisply, "Here, sir." Her gaze remained fixed ahead, on the flagpole where the ensign stirred faintly in the breeze. Corporal Rees, 2 files over, shifted his weight, a subtle smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. The remnants of yesterday's barbs still fresh, the dropped holster and jostled tray woven into the squadron's undercurrent of mockery. The inspection followed, Wilkins' gloved hand probing uniforms with methodical care, but when he reached Elena's position, he paused, his eyes flicking briefly to the observers before moving on. No demands today, no muddied files, just the routine grind, the air taut with unspoken expectation. Post-parade, the squadron marched to the training yard for a full company exercise, a simulated urban breach, the scenario drawn from the shadowed streets of past operations in Northern Ireland. Barricades of sandbags and mock doors lined the field, the ground churned to a muddy paste from earlier drills. Elena's section was tasked with the entry team, her role to coordinate the breach and clear. "Form up," she said quietly to her privates, her voice threading through the wind without excess. They moved out in fire teams, low and deliberate, the crack of simunition rounds punctuating the advance. She led the point, signaling with hand gestures honed to instinct. Cover, move, suppress. The sequence executed with the economy of someone who'd walked real thresholds. The captain observed from an elevated vantage, arms folded across his chest, his scarred jaw set in concentration. The major stood beside him, stopwatch idle in his hand, their conference reduced to nods and murmurs. As Elena's team hit the breach point, she dropped to a knee, adjusting a private stance with a firm touch to the shoulder. "Angle your rifle. Sight the corner." The private complied, and the team flowed through, clearing rooms with controlled precision. But in the press of movement, her cuff rode up again, the winged dagger tattoo flashing briefly under the weak sun, inked during a selection she'd never claimed publicly. A mark from a mission in the sands of Iraq, where her logistics team had pulled an SAS patrol from ambush. Coordinates whispered over encrypted lines. Rees's section followed, their breach faltering on a mistimed flashbang, earning a sharp correction from Hargreaves. "Tighten it up," the major called, his voice carrying across the yard. Laughter rippled from the sidelines. Rees's mates, the mockery veiled as critique. "Hargrove's got the magic touch. Maybe she should lead the lot." The words hung, drawing stifled chuckles from the ranks, the humiliation public yet deniable in the exercise's chaos. Elena reset her team without comment, wiping mud from her gloves, her expression unchanging, a subtle flex in her jaw the only betrayal, internal and reserved. The exercise halted for debrief at midday, the squadron forming a rough semicircle on the grass, breaths laboured in the chill. Hargreaves stepped forward, flanked by the visitors, his ledger open. Debrief, strengths and lapses. Responses came from section leads, clipped and factual, covering fire solid, but exposure on the flank. When Elena's turn arrived, she spoke evenly. "Entry clean, but rear guard needs tighter intervals." Hargreaves nodded, but it was the captain who shifted then, his stillness breaking as he stepped into the circle unbidden, a breach of protocol subtle enough to pass, but deliberate. The yard fell quiet, the ranks sensing the shift, boots scuffing to attention. The captain's gaze settled on Eleanor, not accusatory, but appraising, the weight of recognition in his eyes. He didn't raise his voice. SAS men never did. Instead, he extended a hand toward her. Palm up, a gesture both command and invitation. "Lance Corporal Hargrove, your wrist, if I may." The words were soft, almost lost in the breeze, but they carried like an order. Eleanor hesitated for a fraction of a second, her pulse steadying under the collective stare, then extended her arm. She rolled back the cuff, revealing the tattoo in full, the winged dagger, crossed by a faint scar from shrapnel long-healed. A murmur stirred through the ranks, privates exchanging glances, Reese's smirk fading to confusion. The captain traced the ink with his eyes, not touching, his posture unchanging but for the subtle nod of affirmation. "Kandahar, 2012, he said, his tone even, pitched just for those nearest. "The exfil from the ravine. Your grid references saved Bravo 20's flank. The regiment doesn't forget." The words landed like stones in still water, ripples spreading. Not a shout, but a revelation, public and precise. Elena's face remained composed, her eyes meeting his with the quiet steadiness of shared ground. Classified briefs in Hereford basements, ops rooms thick with tension, the unspoken bond of those who'd stared down the dark. Wilkins stiffened beside Hargreaves, his ledger forgotten, the memory of the muddied file flashing unspoken. Reese's colour drained, the mockery curdling into shame as the squadron processed the implications. Not just a tattoo, but a mark known only to the regiment, a past woven into SAS lore. The major stepped forward now, coming to attention, not a salute but a rigid stance that commanded the yard to mirror it. The ranks froze, the air electric with the weight of it, boots rooted, breaths held, the hierarchy inverting in that suspended moment. Hargreaves saluted then, crisp and formal, his glove snapping against his brow, the gesture rippling outward as Wilkins followed. Then the sections, one by one, the respect rising like mist from the ground. Elena held her ground, cuff still rolled, the tattoo a quiet emblem amid the stillness. No words from her, no triumph in her posture, just the reserved dignity of endurance, the internal release, subtle as a sigh. Shame spread through the ranks like the morning's dew, Reese's eyes downcast, privates shifting uncomfortably, the whispers of exclusion silenced by the truth's quiet force. The captain lowered his hand, nodding once to Elena, a call sign unspoken, ghost wire, from that ravine night. Before stepping back, the observers withdrawing as seamlessly as they'd arrived. The debrief dissolved into stand-down, the squadron dispersing in hushed clusters, the yard emptying under the climbing sun. Elena rolled down her sleeve, falling into step with her section, the weight of the morning settling into something lighter, unvoiced. In the regiment's world, recognition came not in fanfare, but in the freeze of a formation, the salute that bent the rigid lines of hierarchy. Credenhill carried on, drills resuming, the distant call of orders, but from that reckoning, the air held a new restraint. The quiet transformation etched into every bootprint on the square. The afternoon sun hung low over Credenhill, casting elongated shadows across the training yard where the squadron lingered in the aftermath of the debrief. The air carried the faint, metallic tang of spent simunition rounds, mingled with the earthy dampness of trampled grass, a reminder of the exercise's intensity, now suspended in uneasy quiet. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove walked at the rear of her section, her strides measured, the rolled-down sleeve of her fatigues concealing the tattoo once more. No one spoke to her directly. The privates ahead kept their heads down. Their usual banter evaporated like mist under the midday light. Corporal Reese trailed at a distance, his earlier smirk replaced by a rigid set to his shoulders, eyes fixed on the horizon as if the Brecon beacons held some urgent answer. Major Hargreaves dismissed the company with a curt wave, his voice carrying over the yard. "Stand down for admin. Regroup at 1400 for range quals." The ranks broke formation slowly, a shuffle of boots on the gravel rather than the crisp march of earlier hours. The visitors from Hereford remained at the edge of the field, the captain and major conferring with Wilkins in low tones, their postures unchanging, backs straight, hands clasped behind, the epitome of restrained authority. Elena felt their gaze on her periphery, not pressing but present, like the weight of a Bergen during a long tab. She headed toward the armory, her mind already shifting to the inventory logs awaiting her, the routine a familiar anchor amid the shift. Inside the armory, the air was cooler, thick with the scent of gun oil and oiled canvas. Elena methodically racked the section's weapons, her gloved hands moving with the precision of long habit, the click of magazines slotting home the only sound breaking the hush. Private Ellis entered behind her, hesitating at the threshold before approaching with a crate of cleaning kits. "Lance Corporal," he said, his voice subdued, lacking the casual edge of prior days. He set the crate down carefully, avoiding her eyes. "Need a hand with the logs?" It was an offer, tentative but genuine, the first voluntary assistance she'd received from him without prompting. Elena nodded once, passing him a clipboard without elaboration. "Start with the SA-80 serials. Cross-check against the roster." He complied immediately, his movements diligent, the silence between them comfortable now. Unburdened by the old undercurrents, word spread through the base like the ripple of a stone in the Y. Subtle, inexorable. In the ops room, where sergeants pored over maps for the afternoon's quals, Wilkins paused mid-sentence, his ledger open to Elena's entry. The muddied file from days past lay on his desk, retrieved and dried, the classified page now uppermost in his thoughts. He traced the red stamp with a calloused finger, the implications settling over him like the chill of a Welsh evening. No outburst, no apology voiced. Instead, he closed the folder with deliberate care and initialed a note for her next evaluation. Exemplary conduct. Recommend accelerated posting. It was the Army's way. Action over words, reform etched in ink rather than speeches. By 1400, the squadron reassembled on the range, the long butts stretching out under the open sky, targets silhouetted against the distant hills. The captain from Hereford joined Hargreaves at the firing point, his presence drawing the ranks to a sharper attention than the exercise demanded. Eleanor's section took the lanes first, her role to supervise the zeroing drills. She moved between the firers, adjusting sights with minimal instruction. "Breathe out on the pull, steady the group." The privates responded without hesitation now, their stances mirroring her own, the earlier mockery a ghost dispelled by the morning's truth. Reese was on the adjacent lane, his shots grouping tightly, but his focus inward. No glances her way, no muttered asides to his mates. As the session progressed, the major visitor stepped forward unannounced, halting the rotation with a raised hand. The range fell silent, the echo of the last shot fading into the wind. He stood at ease, but his eyes sought Elena's, holding them with the quiet intensity of shared history. "Lance Corporal Hargrove," he said, his voice pitched to carry just to the line, each word measured like a brief in a shadowed briefing room. "Ghost wire." The call sign hung in the air, a relic from that 2012 night in Kandahar, the encrypted whisper that had guided Bravo 20 through the ravine, her grid references the thread pulling them from encirclement. No elaboration, no dramatic recount, just the name spoken with the weight of classified dossiers and regiment oaths. Eleanor's posture didn't alter, but her eyes met his steadily. A flicker of recognition passing unspoken, the ops room in Hereford, the faint hum of monitors, the relief of extraction coordinates locked in. The squadron froze around them, rifles lowered, breaths caught, the hierarchy of the range inverting in that instant. Wilkins, overseeing from the backstop, came to attention first, his boots grinding into the earth, salute snapping up in a fluid arc. Hargreaves followed, then the corporals, privates. One by one the formations saluting not to rank but to the hidden legacy unveiled. Reese's hand rose last, trembling slightly, his face pale against the green of his fatigues, shame etching lines where bravado had been. The major held the salute a beat longer, then dropped it, nodding to Elena with the subtlest incline, a gesture of equals, forged in silence. "The regiment stands by its own," he added, soft enough for the wind to nearly claim it, before turning to confer with the captain. The range resumed, but transformed. Orders given with deference, sections tightening their drills under Elena's quiet guidance. No one mocked her now. The whispers in the mess would shift to murmurs of respect. The exclusions lifted like fog burning off. She logged the scores methodically, the clipboard steady in her hands, the internal reserve yielding to a subtle ease, the dignity of endurance affirmed, not in applause, but in the stillness of salutes across the line. As the sun dipped toward the beacons, casting a golden hue over the butts, the squadron stood down for the day. Elena slung her pack, falling into step with the flow toward the barracks, the weight of the afternoon a quiet reform. Credenhill's routines persisted, the clatter of mess tins, the distant pipe of evening colours, but the air held a new order, respect rising through the ranks like the steady climb of a well-marched tab. In the British way, transformation came reserved, internal, postures straightened. Eye contact held longer, the moral courage of one threading through the whole. The base, with its rigid hierarchies and quiet professionalism, bent just enough to honour what had been hidden, the legacy of that classified page now woven into the fabric of the square. If this story already has your respect, hit the like button. It helps the story of Elena Hargrove reach those who still believe in honour. The sixth day at Credenhill broke with a clarity rare for the Welsh borders, the sun piercing the low clouds to gild the parade square in pale light. Lance Corporal Elena Hargrove rose as always, before the first stirrings in the barracks, her movements a silent ritual against the cool air that seeped through the window frames. She dressed with the same precision, trousers creased sharp, boots buffed to a subdued gleam, though the weight on her shoulders felt fractionally lighter, unacknowledged even to herself. At 28, she'd carried heavier burdens through shadowed valleys, but the quiet shift in the squadron's rhythm registered like the subtle change in wind before a march. Reveille sounded at 05:45, the pipe's call pulling the ranks from their bunks into the morning hush. Elena joined the formation on the gravel, third file, her posture unchanged amid the collective snap to attention. Sergeant Major Wilkins took the salute from the front, his voice steady. "Squadron, attention!" Boots struck the ground in unison, the echo carrying across the square where dew still clung to the edges of the Union Jack. No sidelong glances met her now. The privates ahead stood taller, their eyes fixed forward with a deference born of the previous day's revelation. Corporal Rees formed up 2 files over, his stance rigid, the smirk of old days replaced by a neutral mask, his gaze avoiding hers entirely. The inspection unfolded without incident, Wilkins pacing the lines with his ledger tucked under arm, gloved hand brushing collars and cuffs. When he reached Eleanor's position, he paused, a beat longer than protocol, his eyes meeting hers with the measured respect of a man who'd recalibrated his ledger overnight. "Carry on," he said simply, moving past without demand or flourish. The company exhaled collectively as they stood at ease, the air carrying the faint scent of wet earth and fresh brew from the distant cookhouse. No murmurs followed her. The whispers that had once trailed like mist had evaporated, leaving only the clean cadence of orders. Post-parade, the squadron marched to the training yard for endurance circuits, the ground still soft from recent rains, the break-on beacons, a hazy silhouette on the horizon. Major Hargreaves oversaw from the sidelines, the visitors from Hereford absent now, their Land Rovers departed under cover of night, their assessment complete without fanfare. Elena's section rotated through the obstacles first. Rope climbs slick with dew, low crawls that tested resolve against the chill mud. She led without excess, her voice a quiet anchor. Pace your breath, grip firm. Private Ellis, once hesitant, matched her rhythm now, hauling himself over a wall with determination, sharpened by the day's new clarity. No jests from the rear, the privates followed her cues as if they'd always done so, their movements mirroring the discipline she'd embodied in silence. By midday, the sun warmed the yard enough to steam the puddles, the air thick with the tang of exertion and distant wood smoke from the NAFI. Lunch in the mess hall brought the first tangible shift. Elena queued amid the steam of roast beef and Yorkshire puddings, her tray balanced steady. The benches filled with the usual hum, sergeants dissecting rotas, privates trading clipped observations. But when she took her seat at the corner table, Ellis approached with his own tray in hand. "Mind if I join, Lance Corporal?" His tone was even, respectful, no trace of the old reluctance. She nodded once and he sat opposite, fork moving methodically as he ventured a question on the afternoon's tab. Route through the beacons. Any tips on the inclines? It was practical, unforced, the conversation threading into the routine without awkwardness. Across the hall, Rees sat with his mates, their laughter subdued, the centre of old jests now a quieter corner. One private glanced her way, but it was with curiosity tempered by awe, a quiet legend forming in the ranks, her name linked not to dropped trays or muddied files, but to the winged dagger glimpsed under the sun, the call sign Ghost Wire whispered in the Nafi after lights out. Wilkins entered then, tray in hand, and paused at her table, his broad frame casting a brief shadow. "Hargrove," he said, voice low. "Solid work on the circuits. Quartermaster's putting you on advanced stores, led next rotation. No apology for the file in the mud, no elaboration on the classified page he'd since reviewed in the dim light of his office. Just the acknowledgement, delivered with the dry professionalism of the regiment. Reform enacted through assignment rather than words." Afternoon brought a long tab across the hills, Bergens heavy with simulated loads, the path winding through gorse and heather under a sky threatening rain once more. Eleanor's section took the rear guard, her pace steady as she monitored stragglers, a murmured water break at the crest keeping them aligned. The wind carried the faint cry of a buzzard overhead, the earth firm underfoot despite the recent wet. Reese's group pulled ahead, but when a private in his file twisted an ankle on loose scree, it was Elena who signaled the halt, directing Ellis to fetch the medic pack from her Bergen. "Stabilize the joint. Ice from the stream," she instructed, her hands efficient as she assessed the injury. Reese watched from afar, his intervention unnecessary now, the old barb silenced by the competence that had always been there, veiled only by misunderstanding. As the sun began its descent, painting the beacons in muted gold, the squadron crested the final rise and stood down at the base perimeter. The air cooled rapidly, the chill nipping at exposed skin, but the return march held a cohesion absent before. Sections overlapping without friction, the echo of boots a unified rhythm. Back at Credenhill, evening admin unfolded in the armory, the clink of kit and scent of dubbin filling the space. Elena logged the tab's metrics, her notepad filling with precise entries, when Hargreaves appeared at the door, ledger in hand. "Lance Corporal," he said, stepping inside. "The cadre's report highlights your coordination. Consideration for Hereford direct unofficial for now." His nod was brief, eyes holding hers with the respect of one who'd seen the salute ripple across the range, the institutional bend toward what was right. The base settled into its nightly hush as lights dimmed across the wire. The patter of emerging rain against the barracks windows, a familiar lull. Eleanor sat on her bunk, polishing her boots by the glow of a single lamp, the rhythmic stroke of the cloth steadying her thoughts. No one disturbed her solitude. The corridor outside carried only the muffled tread of patrols, the distant murmur of voices in the Nafi shifting from banter to subdued recounting. Tales of the ravine exfil, pieced together from fragments, her role elevated to quiet myth, without exaggeration. Reese passed her door once, pausing outside but moving on without knock or word, the shame of his actions internalized, a private reckoning in the hierarchy's unyielding code. In the regiment's world, legacy unfolded not in monuments or medals, but in the subtle realignments of daily order, a private's volunteered aid, a sergeant's reassigned duties, the absence of mockery giving way to earned regard. Elena extinguished the lamp, lying back in the dark, the rain's steady drum a reminder of the endurance that defined them all. From that revelation onward, she moved through Credenhill as before, competent, reserved, but the whispers had changed, carrying now the weight of silent honor, the moral courage that bent rigid lines without breaking them. British discipline held firm, its quiet professionalism the forge where injustice yielded to recognition, one measured step at a time. The seventh day at Credenhill dawned with the familiar veil of mist clinging to the parade square, the air crisp and laced with the scent of damp heather carried on the breeze from the beacons. Lance Corporal Eleanor Hargrove stirred before the reveille, her bunk made with the precision that had become her silent signature, the coarse sheets tucked without a crease. She stepped into the corridor, the flagstones cool under her socks, and made her way to the ablutions block where the first light filtered through narrow windows. At 28, the routines of the base felt woven into her like the threads of her fatigues, unyielding, but now threaded with a subtle ease, the weight of revelation settling into equilibrium without fanfare. By 05:45, the pipe sounded, rallying the squadron into the grey morning. Eleanor took her place in the formation, third file, the gravel crunching faintly under boots as the ranks aligned. Sergeant Major Wilkins' commands cut through the hush. "Squadron, by the right. Quick march." The movement was fluid, a collective rhythm unbroken, the echo of the brick barracks carrying the steady assurance of order restored. No hesitations marked the lines now. The privates stood with shoulders squared, their glances forward holding a quiet attentiveness that extended to her without excess. Corporal Reese formed up in his position, his posture correct, the old undercurrents of resentment smoothed into professional detachment, his eyes meeting no one's in particular. The morning parade unfolded in its prescribed cadence, inspection a ritual of gloved hands and clipped nods. Wilkins paced the square, his ledger open, pausing at Elena's file with the measured regard of one who'd adjusted his ledger in the quiet of his office. "Immaculate," he murmured almost to himself, before moving on. No elaboration, no reference to the muddied pages of days past, just the acknowledgement embedded in the word, reform enacted through the Army's understated code. The company stood at ease, breaths visible in the chill, the faint aroma of brewing tea drifting from the cookhouse as the sun began to pierce the mist. Post-parade, the squadron dispersed to the armory for final equipment audits ahead of the week's close. Elena led her section through the racks, her instructions delivered with the same economy. Check tolerances on the slings, report variances. Private Ellis worked beside her now without prompting, his hands steady as he logged entries, the clipboard passing between them in seamless exchange. "All nominal here, Lance Corporal," he said, his tone even, the deference natural rather than forced. No traces of the old mockery lingered. The air in the stores carried only the clean scent of oiled metal and canvas, the space a sanctuary of purpose reclaimed. Midday brought a brief stand-easy in the mess hall, the hall filled with the steam of cottage pie and the low hum of conversation. Eleanor queued with her tray, the line moving efficiently, and when she reached her corner table, it was no longer solitary. A pair of privates from her section joined her uninvited but welcome, one sliding onto the bench with a nod. "Mind the company, ma'am." She inclined her head, fork pausing midway to her plate. "Carry on." Their talk turned to the afternoon's briefings, tactics from shadowed ops, shared in fragments without probing her past, the exchange practical, the inclusion a quiet bridge across the old divides. Across the room, Reese ate in silence with his mates, their laughter absent, replaced by subdued discussion of rotas, his contributions measured, the shame of prior days internalized into restraint. The afternoon session in the ops room focused on after-action reviews, the battered projector casting maps of hypothetical terrains onto the wall, alleys echoing Belfast, ridges reminiscent of the Hindu Kush. Major Hargreaves facilitated, his voice steady as he called on sections for input. When Elena's turn came, she rose without flourish, outlining a flank adjustment from the urban breach. Intervals tightened to 15 meters, reduces exposure without sacrificing cover. The room nodded collectively, Wilkins jotting notes with a subtle underline, the visitor's absence leaving only the base's own hierarchy to affirm her words. No questions challenged her. The squadron absorbed the insight, the quiet competence now the standard rather than the exception. As the sun waned, casting long shadows over the yard, the squadron marched to the perimeter for a final patrol drill, the wind picking up with the promise of evening rain. Elena coordinated the rear, her signals crisp against the gathering dusk. Eyes on the tree line, report movement. The privates responded with precision, their steps aligned, the exercise flowing without the hitches of weeks prior. Reese's section overlapped at a waypoint, a brief handover marked by his curt, "All clear, Lance Corporal," the words devoid of edge, the professional courtesy a step toward atonement unspoken. The drill concluded at the wire, the base's lights flickering on as the ranks stood down, the air cooling to carry the distant low of cattle from the valley below. Evening admin brought Elena to the quartermaster's store, where she oversaw the rotation of supplies, the shelves orderly under her direction. Wilkins appeared at the threshold, his frame filling the doorway, ledger in hand. "Hargrove," he said, stepping inside, "your file's been cleared for review. Full commendation appended. The classified section. It's noted." His tone was clipped, eyes holding hers with the dry respect of the ranks. No apology for the mud that had once soiled it, but the gesture clear: institutional reform, the hierarchy bending to honor what it had overlooked. She nodded once. "Understood, Sergeant Major," the exchange complete, the weight of the page now a foundation rather than a burden. The base hushed as night fell, the rain arriving in a soft patter against the barracks' roofs, the corridors emptying to the murmur of the Nafi. Elena returned to her bunk, the single lamp casting a warm pool as she reviewed her notepad. Entries from the week, metrics of progress unadorned. No one sought her out for banter. The solitude was chosen now, the respect granting her space without isolation. In the distance, the pipe sounded for lights out, the squadron settling into bunks with the quiet satisfaction of a cycle closed. Reese lay in his own rack, staring at the beams overhead, the lessons of the square etching deeper, the cost of underestimation, the value of silent steel. From that day forward, Cretenhill carried the imprint of transformation, subtle as the dew on the gravel at dawn. No one mocked Elena Hargrove. The whispers in the mess shifted to nods of regard, her name invoked in rotas with priority, the lance corporal's role elevated without title or parade. Privates volunteered for her sections, corporals like Reese deferred in briefings. The squadron's cohesion tightened by the thread of her unveiled legacy, the ravine exfil, the winged dagger, the call sign Ghostwire, a quiet legend shared in hushed tones after Stand Easy. Wilkins' inspections passed her with affirmation. Hargreaves' evaluations marked her for Hereford's pipeline, the regiment's reach extending like the wise, steady flow. She moved through it all as before, boots echoing on the square, hands steady on the range, gaze fixed on the horizon, but the air held a new reserve. Postures straightened in her presence, eye contact lingering with earned trust, the moral courage that had endured injustice now the measure for the ranks. In the British Army's unyielding world, discipline was the creed, its quiet professionalism, the silent honor that bound them. From the privates scrubbing floors to the majors in shadowed briefs, what began in mud and mockery ended in recognition, a testament to the restraint that forged legends not in glory, but in the enduring strength of doing what's right, one measured step across the parade square. Subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and justice within the ranks. Thank you for watching the case of Sergeant threw her file in the mud, until he read the page marked Classified SS. See you in the next one.